Our primary mission here at Alternate Media is to bridge the gap between Judaism and Christianity as it's existed for far too long. Yeshua, as we know, never intended to start a new religion. He was a religious Jew.
I think at a certain point in every believer's life where we think, isn't there more?
There has definitely been a need within the church. That's something that a lot of Christians are searching for. A lot of Christians know that there is something missing in their faith. And what indeed is intended to fill that is Judaic roots of the faith.
The New Testament is very clear about bridging the gap between Jew and Gentile, and we're just returning that mission back to the modern day.
Hello and welcome, shalomi, my homies, to everybody who is joining us tonight. Tonight we're going to be doing another debate review. There was recently a debate on the validity of Torah in the life of Christians held on Will Walkey's YouTube channel, and it was, I honestly, I think it was a good debate. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching each interlocutor introduce their arguments and make their arguments. Definitely some commentary that I knew I could add to it. And I've really enjoyed last time that I did a debate review having the moderator of that debate on when I had Will from the Church Split on. So tonight I've got that moderator from that previous debate on. Let me bring up Brother Will Walkey.
What's up?
It's good to have you back, brother. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, I'm good. But hey, real quick, which Will is your favorite?
Oh, man, you can't put me on the spot like this.
Now, there's many Wills, but to Alternate Media, who is the true Will?
Oh, you know what? Here's the thing, man. You've got that Will Walkey red, and we've got the cobalt blue. So I just feel like I can't give it to you on that basis.
Fine. I still love you guys. I still love you. We're at the end of the day. It's fine.
Absolutely. And you've been on the channel before, having a couple of debates actually that I think went spectacularly. One of which you had with this one interlocutor who was on the debate that you hosted.
Yeah, and it was funny because after that we became super cool, and he has come to me with questions, and he's been respectful, and no animosity or anything.
Absolutely. No, I think it's worth pointing out that first. MJ is a cool guy, right? He was super chill, super cool, very respectful in the debate that we hosted here. Both backstage and then on stage. Naturally, things get heated when you're on stage. But backstage before and after the debate, super chill guy. So no bad blood there at all. But we disagree on some issues.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, we're all Chaz. So
yeah, absolutely. That was low, man. Okay. So as the moderator of that debate, right before we jump into the content itself, how was your experience moderating? Right, that's a difficult position to be, especially when you already have a bias as to which side of the debate is correct. So, kind of explain how that went for you.
It was hard. It was hard. So yes, I mean, I was more on Trevor's side than MJ's, obviously. As me as a Torah observer, I really tried to bite my lip. Some of the things that MJ said, I disagreed. I'm like, I want to say, but I can't bite my tongue. Even with Trevor explaining stuff, I also thought he could have I thought of another verse he could add to argue his point. I tried to keep quiet. And plus, with everyone watching, a lot of people knew I was on more of Trevor's side. So I tried really hard to do the best as I can as a moderator to just be not biased. If MJ has a really good point to why Christians should not follow the Torah, the law, anything like that, please present it. So I tried my best because I knew I was afraid there might be Christians who would say that I favored Trevor or I was unfair in any way, shape, or form. But both people are cool with me. Both people recommended me to moderate it, and they specifically wanted me to. So, but it was fun. I prefer probably debating more than moderating.
Likewise. Yeah, definitely. Even watching it, there were points where I was just like, oh man, I wish I was in this discussion. I wish I was part of this discussion now. There were definitely parts where it was like, man, I wish that I was like in Trevor's back pocket, right? That he had like a separate message bubble open to where I could like maybe type something out to him or something. But I kind of left that to the live chat, which, as usual with these kind of debates, was kind of toxic.
Yeah,
probably the worst that I've seen was the debate we did with the Black Doctor and Buck Rogers 298 with the church split. That was a bloodbath of a live chat. But this one, it's interesting. You always see the dynamic of like whoever they're already rooting for is who they think is winning the debate. So there's not a lot of objectivity on, how that's going.
Yeah. Now, real quick, I do have to say, I was really disappointed though towards the end of the debate. I was really disappointed from a lot of the Christians who disagree with Trevor. Brad, I mean, you saw, the entire section was filled with questions for MJ. And me as a moderator, I can't ask, like, I probably had 50 questions for MJ. Like it was crazy. And I saw the people in there who are friends with MJ, and the entire time they're just saying, oh, Trevor lost, Trevor sucks. Go back to the Bible, Trevor. Just these little cheap shots. And it was really frustrating for me, especially as a moderator, because it's like you have an opportunity right now to ask Trevor a question. You guys watch this. I mean, it was like 3 hours. I definitely was not strict on time because going back to the debate you were bringing up, I'm not blaming Will at all because I understand you guys agreed on the terms and everything like that. But I wish it did go on. I wish, especially the argument with the Didache between Sheamus and Black Doctor, where I like continue that. Like you had your foot on the throat and like we're just waiting, but then Will continued it. So I wanted it to go on, but it was really frustrating because I had so many questions for MJ and like none for Trevor. And then even after I saw 3 videos of people, 2 were in the chat where they're just making TikTok videos of, oh, Trevor lost, he sucks. And it's like, come on, dude, you were here, ask the question, right? So that was the most frustrating and really honestly disappointing part.
Yeah. And I mean, it reflects badly, not on MJ in particular, but just on, I would say, the community in totality. Because like you said, this was the Q&A portion of the debate, right? This was, if you really thought that you had an ace in the hole to trap Trevor with, like this was your chance to ask. But instead of doing that, you just wanted to berate him. That, well, first of all, it doesn't look good. It's kind of projecting, which is something we'll get a little bit more in. There was definitely some projecting that went on in this debate, and it's something I hope we can get around to discussing tonight. So without further ado, unless there's anything else you wanted to address real quick before we bring up the video feed.
Excuse me, Brad. Aren't we forgetting something?
Oh, we are. Brother, who is with you in spirit tonight?
Huh?
Spirits.
I got an amazing Crown Apple. Something simple. I'm a big whiskey guy. Anything Crown or bourbon, that's my thing.
I've not tried the Crown Apple. I've heard nothing but good things about it from everybody that I know who has tried it. I just haven't picked up a bottle yet. but I'll have to put it on my list if that's something you highly recommend.
Oh, absolutely. That and vanilla are my favorite.
What I'm doing right now is if you are ever in Savannah, I don't know if you can get it anywhere else, but if you ever happen to be in Savannah, Georgia, or anywhere near it, it is a Savannah bourbon. And this is easily one of my favorite bourbons now. It's a different flavor profile. It's actually almost got a little bit of like fruitiness to it that's just makes it stand apart from other bourbons. I really like it. Little harsh, so maybe let it sit a bit, but definitely a good one. So that's what I will be enjoying tonight. And let's bring up the video feed here. The first timestamp that you gave me was around 45 minutes and 25 seconds. We'll start just a little bit before that because I think context-wise, it kind of helps to gather what's happening at this point. You tell me where you think is a good place to stop.
Okay.
All right.
Trevor, is there anything that you want him to clarify, or are we good to go on to your next question?
Absolutely. He's made the claim a few times that the law, it's kind of a library term, as he said, and he keeps relying on this idea or term of a moral law. As far as I'm aware, there is no place in Scripture that actually separates the law. In fact, all throughout the entire Bible, the law is clearly seen as one, including by Jesus. He said clearly that he didn't bring a new law. I understand that a lot of people want to go to a few verses to imply that and make a contradiction there, but that's not the case. So I would like you to clarify, what is the moral law and what Bible verse do you get this moral law from?
You're implying that a Gentile went to the temple and offered up a sacrifice to Yahweh. This is nonsense. Paul says that the Gentiles followed the law. They did not follow the Torah.
That's not an implication, it's a question. Can you show me a Bible verse that actually says moral law? It's not an implication, it was a question. You made the allegation that Gentiles are only to follow the moral law. Can you give me a Bible verse that would suggest that the law is somehow separated and that the entirety of God's law is not moral?
Yes.
What Bible verse do you get this from?
Leviticus 18. I think 18:2. Yep, Leviticus 18:2. Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. And these are the prescription verses of these laws. Burnt offering, grain offering. Did he say? Did God say, "Hey,
all right, Brad,
we're just gonna add these to the
all right"?
No. These are.
See, this is where I think MJ kind of goes off a little bit. And I feel like this is the argument or the harsh truth that a lot of the Christians have to come to a realization of. I think even in churches now, they break up the Torah, right? They break up all 613 and say, well, this is a ceremonial, this is a food law, it's this and that. Nowhere is that brought up in Scripture. Now, what MJ was talking about was like the grain offering and whatever else was in that verse, but nothing was mentioned of a moral law. And right. I'm glad I'm glad right where you started it, because that was now his next question going into this. And his next question was, you talk about this moral law, where is it? And right. He goes to Leviticus showing the grain offering, like it's still avoiding the question. Right.
That was the thing that immediately struck me when this transpired, is that, for number one, like you didn't answer the question. The question was not asking for a clarification on why you think that Trevor's position is incorrect. The question was asking for a basis from which to derive the idea of separations in the Torah itself, right? Show me where you're getting that from, where you get this idea that there is a moral, a civil, and a ceremonial, or whatever the three separations he was arguing, because I think there's like 2 or 3 variations of the 3 separations. But yeah, so when he answered, well, your implication is that, it's like, well, okay, that's immediately not answering the question. right off the bat. And I understand a few reasons for doing that is because, it's in this format of debate, it's very hard to kind of drop the previous topic so that you can answer the direct question that's being asked, right? Because we're still thinking through the frame of whatever the previous topic of discussion was, and they may actually directly pertain to one another. But ultimately, if you're still arguing the topic of the previous question and you're not actually answering the current question, then you haven't answered the current question.
Yeah, it's the whole thing with the moral too that MJ initially brought up. What defines morality? I feel like this is the argument too that atheists use all the time, where
Right.
what defines morality? And well, it's hard. Us, if you are a Christian or if you are whatever title you want to give yourself, if the Bible, whether 66, 73, 78 book, whatever, canon, if this is your holy book and you want to live by this, and the God of this book is the God that you follow, then he gives us lists of statutes, things to live by for us to follow. So that book becomes our morality. But when we start saying how, well, we have to, the dietary law is gone. Well, where's the dietary law? It's not in there. Or we only have to follow this moral law, the ceremony. None of that's there. The only thing which MJ brought up was the grain offering and whatever else that was in Leviticus, 18:2, I think it was.
Right.
But that's just the type of sacrifices, the grain offering, it's those types of sacrifices. We don't see a moral, we don't see a food law, we don't see a ceremonial law at all throughout the entire Torah.
Right. And typically in my experience, and you can tell me what yours is when that topic comes up, because that's a very frequent line of argumentation that we will get right from the anti-Torah crowd, is that we're only held to the moral law today. And then when you ask them what that moral law is, typically in my experience, we get answers like, the 10 Commandments. Of course, the problem with that is that the 10 Commandments include the Sabbath, which they say is a ceremonial law. So now we have to rationalize how it's the 10 Commandments minus the Sabbath, and then some will say that it's the 4 prohibitions, and so it's like, okay, well, now which one is it? Is it the 4 prohibitions or the 10 Commandments? And then as far as the 4 prohibitions, most of those really just have to do with idolatry, not so much morality itself, especially when it comes to eating blood and eating strangled meat. That's not really a moral issue. There are a few key answers that you typically get. In your experience, what would you say is the most common that you have received?
I mean, honestly, kind of like what you said with people will say the 10 Commandments, right? Like, oh, well, for Gentiles, they're only supposed to follow the 10 Commandments. And then you bring up the Sabbath, right? And they'll say, okay, well, you see, they'll bring that verse up in Acts where they collected money on the next day, and that's when they gathered. Yeah. So so this is what the church fathers did. So we should do this also. No, because you just told me that we are now supposed to follow the 10 Commandments, and now you're moving the goalpost to where the Sabbath, it's kind of different. And then, like you said, the 4 laws in Acts 15. Well, now that's I mean, by that measure of standard, I can kill someone without any problems. It doesn't mention that, or I've even heard where Yeshua, people will say, what are the 2 greatest commandments? Love God and love your neighbor.
Right.
Okay, well but then it comes into, how do you love God? What things can I do that would please God? Right. And then we go back when we read throughout the entire Bible, it's the Torah. By doing these things, they are pleasing to him. And we also get blessings when we do it.
Right. Right.
So either way, there's always going to be some kind of hole where it almost seems like a lot of people who come up with these conclusions are just, they don't know the Bible, and it's just like just do this and shut up. You're cool. So, which initially me, I disagree with.
Right. And I've also gotten it's anything that's repeated in the New Testament,
Yeah,
which
well,
still leaves a lot to be desired. One of my favorite arguments that I've heard regarding that comes from a mutual friend of ours, which is the New Testament doesn't really reiterate laws regarding incestual relationships. So if it's only what's repeated in the New Testament, then marrying within familial relations should be okay, right? Like you can marry your sister and that would be okay, right? Clearly nobody's going to agree to that, not even the anti-Torah Christian. So now you've got to establish, well, okay, now how is that immoral then? It's not repeated in the New Testament, and you've clearly given a basis for what is in the Old Testament and not repeated in the New Testament being invalid. So like how do you establish that moral standard outside of a biblical argument at that point?
right.
And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, and yeah, actually, it was so during the chat, there was a question that was constantly being repeated by by someone I know, and she was wanting me to ask MJ towards the end. Ask him if we can now have sex with animals. And I'm like, I'm not asking that. And well, so she called me after, and she's like, I'm mad at you. I'm like, 'cause I didn't ask the question. She's like, no, because no Christian has ever answered that question. Like, you might be laughing, but no Christian has ever asked that question. And that was the perfect opportunity to ask him in front of everyone, can we now have sex with animals? Because if he says yes, he's going to have his own problem with the Christian community. And if he says no, why is it now wrong to have sex with animals? So,
Right.
that was something I was like, you know what, you have a point. You have a good point.
Yeah. Some arguments, just for the sake of completeness, some arguments that I've heard when bringing stuff like that up is, well, that's covered under the general speaking against sexual immorality that we find in the New Testament, right? We get this big blanket term, sexual immorality, and so that's covered under that. And it's like, well, but is it though, right? Because it is a blanket term, which means that we now have to have a specific definition for it, right? Because if it's really that broad stretching and blanketing, then there could potentially even be circumstances into which this extends into the marriage bed, right? Are people having kosher sex within the confines of their marriage, and that kind of adds more complexity to even the marriage dynamic than I think God ever intended. That's supposed to be a rather simple. The marriage bed is undefiled, right? So I arguably, as long as it's consensual between married adults, then have at it, but you have to have a clear, specific definition. You can't just have a blanket, overarching term that doesn't have clearly defined boundaries as to what it extends to and what it doesn't, because then anybody can make it extend to anything that they want it to, right? And then we have this idea that marriage is only, or sex even within a marriage is only for procreation. It's not really for enjoyment of the married couple. And that if you're doing it for enjoyment, then now you have violated this impetus for or against sexual immorality, right? Because we've made it a blanket term that has no clearly defined boundaries. Or we can just accept that the Torah in Leviticus 18, oddly enough, establishes these specific boundaries for sexual morality as a blanket term. In other words, when we see sexual morality in the New Testament, we immediately have to reference the Torah to know what it's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And Paul references it, constantly. It's, I don't know, man. People, they hear that word and they right away just think of like legalism, and it's, as soon as you get away from the Torah and you have your own interpretation, this is now, right, why we have like 40,000 denominations within Christianity, because everyone has their own interpretation instead of just relying solely on the Bible through the Torah.
Right.
So
Right. And let's see. I'm trying to move it to the next timestamp you had, which was 47:30, I believe.
okay.
So I think I got it up to 47, like 25 or something. Let's see.
But overall,
Oh, okay, I
while
see.
you're-
We've already played through that.
okay. But
Unless
yeah,
they
while you're looking for that, it was a good discussion though between MJ and Trevor, because both Acts 15, and then even towards the end after the questions, they wanted to tackle Acts chapter 10, and
Right.
even referring to the quote unquote food law.
Good grief. Am I gonna have to like refresh the entire page? Yeah, hang on. I'm still trying to find
You're good. While you're doing that, Brad, I have a question for you. So this is something that MJ brought up in his introduction that I was asked about this many times. MJ brought up there are only 12 Torah laws. I don't know if you weren't there for his introduction, I don't think. So he brought up how there's not actually 613 laws. They're commands. And there's only 12 Torah laws. However, one of my friends did a video. He said there's actually 16 Torah laws. And I'm still kind of in the dark on this. Because at first when he said 12, I'm like, is he talking about the 10 Commandments? But he was like, no, it's 12. And, how interesting that it's only 12, referring to, I don't know, 12 tribes of Israel or 12
right.
disciples, whatever. So super confused by that. Because I even had people message me afterwards and like, what are the 12 Torah laws? Like, I don't remember reading this.
Right. And that is probably something that's derived from I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head which commentary, but probably something that's derived from one of the rabbinic commentaries or found somewhere expounded on in the Talmud. But the basic idea, and this is something really we're familiar with, right, is I would say that Yeshua says that there are only two Torah laws, right? To love God and love your neighbor. And then you can separate the 10 commandments between those two, right? The first 5 being love for God and the next 5 being love for your neighbor. And I know many people would actually separate that 4 and 6 because most people would include loving or honoring your father and mother in loving one's neighbor. There's an interesting rabbinic argument as to why that actually directly pertains to loving God rather than loving the neighbor. But it does act as a bridge between the two, though. And even within those 10, there's more detail, right? So what does it mean not to have any gods before Hashem? What does it mean to remember the Sabbath, right? What does it mean to honor your father and mother? These are topics that are general and very broad stretching, so they themselves would require further detail. And this is where we get the 613 from ultimately. So I'm sure that there are probably a few different arguments that come from probably a number of different rabbis on why there are, the main 12 or the main 16 and 16 may even be like an odd combination of the 10 plus the 6 Noahide laws. And there's like the 7th would be like a crossover between those two. I'm sure there's any number of ways that it's argued that like those are kind of the basics and then everything else is just further explanation on those. I would also agree with Yeshua that really it can ultimately be boiled down to 2. And then everything else is further detail on that. The way that I've typically explained that, right, is let's say that, when you're a kid and your parents leave the house, and dad says that while they're gone, that he wants you to clean the house. Well, that's one commandment, right? Clean the house. It's very, very broad stretching, very overarching. But we can separate that into clean the living room, clean the bedrooms, clean the dining room, clean the kitchen, clean the bathrooms, right? So we have 5 that we can get from that. And garage and basement, if you have those, attic, what have you, right? And those are actually still pretty overarching, because when it comes to cleaning the bedrooms, well, okay, so, make sure the floor is clean, make sure the floor is vacuumed, but also wipe down the baseboards, clear the cobwebs that are in the corners between the walls and the ceiling. Like there are a number of specific details that can be added onto those. And then even regarding those, okay, so cleaning the baseboards. So there may be a very specific sponge or rag, and then cleaning chemical that he wants used on the baseboards, right? And this is where we got into much more nitty-gritty particular details of like, okay, this is like, we know Dad well enough to know that this is the specifics of what he wants and how he wants this done. He wants them wiped down from right to left rather than left to right, right? It may be arbitrary details, but this is how Dad likes it, right? That is what I would equate the oral tradition itself to, right? That's where, when you're getting into those really, really specified detail of the how to do these things. But all of that stems from really one singular commandment: clean the house.
Right. That's one thing, though, I really wish Trevor questioned him on. Like, what do you mean by this 12? Because he doesn't believe in any type of oral law or any of the Noahide or anything like that. MJ strictly is 66 only. So it would have been good, I think, for Trevor to push on that. Have him explain this from a 66 book canon, no tradition, view.
Absolutely. I definitely can agree. I think that that's something that might have been pressed a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Oh, let's see. I'm not sure why it's not just jumping to the point that I want it to, but it's not. In any case, we're at about 47 minutes here. Let me bring this back up and we will there, it'll probably be about where we want it by the time I get the volume up.
Prove that a Gentile went to the temple and offered up a sacrifice to Yahweh. They had pagan gods. This is nonsense.
Okay. Well, again, that passage doesn't justify anything. My question, again, just to reiterate, my question is, where do you get this separation, this idea of moral law? Can you show me a Bible verse that says moral law?
No, I cannot find you a Bible verse that says moral law. Paul says the Gentiles were under the law. This is indisputably talking about the moral law, because you cannot say that they went to the temple and offered up a sacrifice to the Levitical priesthood.
Can you pause it real quick?
Well, I
absolutely.
believe that you're accusing me of arguing from silence.
Let's see.
So I just wanted to just say something real quick. It's interesting because he says there is no verse talking about the oral that says oral law. Like, yes, Trevor, you are right. I submit. However, he's talking about the moral law. That's really hard to point out, that there's no verse on this, yet Paul is talking about it, because now we're presupposing now that Paul is talking about this moral law that doesn't exist. Like, Paul had one of the greatest mentors, right, in history to basically give him shmicha, who he learned under. And, Paul knew the Torah very, very, very well.
Very well.
So it's, for there to be no such thing as a moral law that MJ just said, but he's talking about it.
Right.
How?
I think it's worth noting here too, considering the argument that he just made. Okay. He essentially just tried to disqualify the idea that the totality of Torah was applicable to Gentiles at this point, because they were pagans, right? So clearly the religious customs of Torah law were not given to the Gentiles. So it must be the moral law that Paul is talking about that is applicable to them. The problem I find with that argument is that it still runs up against the exact same problem. The Gentile nations were also never given the what he would even call the moral law. If you were to get a concise description of what he thinks the moral law is as defined by the Bible, there was never a point where God gives that to any Gentile nation either, right? So we have the same problem. So either Gentiles are beholden to a set of laws with which they were never presented, right, and can therefore not actually be in violation of, or the totality of the Torah is, at least as far as what Paul seems to be saying, directly applicable to Gentiles at this point. I would maybe clarify Gentiles who are trying to be part of that covenant, right? And that was, I noticed a sticking point throughout the entire debate is that it seems that MJ wasn't really getting that God never made a covenant with any Gentile nation. And he would acknowledge that throughout the debate, but I don't think he understands the implications of that, okay? If we acknowledge that those who are in covenant with God are the ones who Torah is applicable to, then we can't use Gentile nations that are not in covenant with God as the example of what the Gentile believer today is beholden to, because they were not in covenant with God. In other words, they were not saved, right? They were outside of the covenants of promise. So to now be brought into the covenants of promise directly indicates that the laws that are directly tied to that covenant of promise are now applicable to you. So it's like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, well, yeah, I mean, Gentiles aren't beholden to the Torah because the Torah was never given to them. Well, sure, yeah, it wasn't, because they weren't in covenant with God. So are you saying that Christians are not in covenant with God? Is that the argument that you're making? I would at least accept it if that were the argument that he was making, because that's at least consistent. But now you have to explain how salvation works if Christians are not in covenant with God.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you want to pull that up, you can, if you want to play a little bit more, I think.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to point that one part out, because as soon as you say that there is no, there, you know what I mean? There's nothing there for moral law, but Paul is talking about it, I'm like, come on.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But that's quite literally your argument. So you're saying that there is a moral law, but there's not a Bible verse to the moral law. But Paul told Gentiles that they're under the law, but yet
Paul never said that. That's not true.
Well, that's what you said. It must have been you must have misspoke. But I do want to clarify, he actually did instruct Gentiles to keep things like the feasts. He did tell Gentiles that they are to follow the law. We could see him telling the Gentiles to keep the feasts in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 8, where he clearly instructs, because of Jesus' sacrifice, that we should keep the feasts, not with old leaven. 1 Corinthians 5, verse 8. As well, knowing that, he clearly told Gentiles to follow the law. And those feasts are only found in the Old Testament. So again, I would ask you, where are you getting this idea of moral law? Because that is actually kind of a library term that's not found in Scripture.
And I think he
actually
gives it in a few seconds.
Not just the entire Old Testament.
I think he says James.
So again, where do you find this idea of moral law?
Again, we're going to keep going back and forth. Paul makes it explicitly clear that the Gentiles follow the law. And I'm going to ask you, when it's my turn, show me where they offered up an animal sacrifice. Again, you're going to have to argue from silence, because this never happened.
So I guess we're not going to come to a conclusion. You're right. Paul does actually, as I stated, tell Gentiles to keep the feasts and follow the law on multiple occasions. There's no implication whatsoever of a separation of God's law. God's law, all throughout the Old Testament and New, is defined as one. Jesus clearly said that he doesn't bring a new commandment. We also see John clearly reiterate the same thing, that there's not a new commandment, that it's an old commandment that you've had from the beginning. This idea of the moral law is quite literally an argument from silence. So if we can, let's try to try to keep things in the context that we could prove with scripture. It's harder to fight against opinion versus something that we can actually prove.
I think the James
The Torah says explicitly how
That-
to offer up a animal sacrifice.
Yep, I think the James reference you're talking about actually was later in the discussion. I think it was actually when they were referring to Acts chapter 10. Let me.
You're
move
right.
that
You're right.
point.
Yep.
Let's see. That's at 2:10:45.
Um,
Yeah, that was a very, very interesting part of the discussion there. Acts chapter 10. That was.
Before you jump there, I did want to say, with MJ though, without having a rebuttal though to Trevor, he just says we're just gonna disagree. You
Yeah.
know?
Personally, if Trevor was, I would say, a lot nicer than maybe I would have been at that point. I would have definitely, as soon as he said, well, we're just not going to agree on that, I would say, okay, so are you conceding the point then? Right? Because I'm asking for evidence of this thing that you say is real and you are not able to give it. So, like, you have to concede the point at that point, you know? And it's not, I understand the being nice and it's something I personally try and do myself. But being nice doesn't mean that you can't at least press to like say, okay, you probably need to concede this point then. And that's something I think would have definitely worked a lot in Trevor's benefit. And I honestly, I still think he came away from the situation presenting better because he kind of just brushed that off very okay, look, it's clear we're not going to come to an agreement on this. We probably should just stick to this point then to things that we actually can prove from scripture. So you know what, let me amend what I said. He actually assumed the concession.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad way to approach that, actually. Having thought through it now, no, I think I like that better. Just to assume the concession, concede the argument for them, since at this point, it didn't seem like the argument was going to be conceded, even if you were to press them on it. And that probably would have led to more circular discussion. So I you know what? Props, Trevor. But yeah, I definitely think when it comes to that topic, especially when they were talking around what Paul said, what Paul is telling Gentiles to do, Trevor made an excellent point there, bringing up that Paul commands them to keep the feasts. But
Yes.
I would maybe have actually brought to bear that Paul more than instructs them to keep the feasts, but he actually instructs them in things that are not even Torah law, right? So when Paul gives instruction on head coverings and suggests that married women need to have head coverings, like that's actually not in the written Torah. So Paul isn't just instructing these Gentile congregations in the written Torah alone, but he's actually giving them more traditionally Jewish oral Torah at this point and saying, hey, these are things that apply to you also. Even if you don't necessarily agree with the oral Torah position, that's a heck of a position for an anti-Torah Christian to try and combat at that point.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, we're at 2:10:36, so it's a little before your timestamp.
You break the law.
Well, that's not breaking a law. There's
Do
a difference between.
Do not eat anything that's unclean, and you eat it. This is violation of the Torah law.
Okay, so eat. Oh, okay. Well, the language here is much different. So let's go to Acts 10. A lot of people, like this gentleman, will try and make the accusation that Acts 10 is giving Gentiles the free reign to just go eat pork or really whatever they want to eat. So the number one issue is that's just taking out all of the context from the scripture, what it's about, and what the end result is, and just propagating we can eat food when it was actually never about food. This is a parable and a vision. And Peter clearly was thinking of what this vision was about, and God showed him. If we look at Acts 10, verse 1, we see that it starts over about a Gentile named Cornelius. Now, the Jewish people believed that it would make one unclean to bring in a Gentile from another nation into their house to eat with them, or vice versa. And Cornelius, who was a just and upright man, sent some men to Peter. So while these men were on their way to Peter, Peter had a vision where he's seen the sheets with all unclean things, and God said, "Rise, kill Peter, and eat." Peter then stated, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." This happened again 3 times. As we continue through the scripture, we see that Peter was perplexed about this vision, to the point to where he understood that this couldn't be what he thought it meant. And as he was contemplating this, then came the men sent to him by Cornelius. And that's whenever Peter gave his conclusion to this meaning, as we see in Acts 10, verse 28, also Acts 11 through 7. We see Peter clearly suggest that this had nothing to do with food, but rather it had to do with people, Gentiles being included, that we should not call Gentiles common or unclean. So this parable and vision was never actually about food, but it was about Gentiles and nothing more. And to suggest that this was about food in itself giving us the right to sin, or it has a double meaning, is just ludicrous, considering it's a vision, it's a parable, and he already gives us the definition of what that parable meant. He never stated we can also go off and eat pork. Rather, he stated that this was clearly about Gentiles and nothing more.
Okay, so it is absolutely about food. And James 1, I just had it up, but I lost it. James 1, where's it at? James 1. First of all, it says that, there it is. James 1:13 tells us that God will not tempt us in a sin. God, picture this. God sends down a sheet full of unclean animal. My opponent is saying God's going to violate his character and tempt Peter by eating these unclean fruit or unclean animals. This is in violation of God's character. James 1:13 says that no one should say we were tempted by God, for God will not tempt with evil. So if violating the Torah means that you are eating unclean food, you just contradicted God's character. Now, at the end of this verse, when Peter says that these were clean and unclean, you yourself said that this is how someone becomes unclean. How are they unclean? By what they ate. So when Peter says these people are not clean or unclean, this is absolutely referring to food. Or God tempted Peter in violation of God's character. And I'm going to go with God did not tempt him in evil way to violate the Torah. And this is explicitly about food, because when did we ever get God say, kill this Gentile and eat it? The context is explicitly clear. It is food.
Do you have your Bible in front of you, friend? Can you read from Acts 10:28 for the audience? Acts 10:28. Because you just made this seem like this is my opinion or my interpretation. No, sir. It's written scripture. Let's go to Acts 10:28.
And he said to them, you yourself know unlawful it is for a man who is a Jew to associate with a foreigner or visit him. Yet God has shown me I should not call men unholy or unclean. How were they
uncommon or unclean? So Peter clearly defines that vision was about Gentiles and God.
Okay.
Hold on just a second. Hold on, because you were making it seem like it was my conclusion.
It is your opinion.
That's Peter. It's not Trevor. Peter clearly said in the context of this vision, if you go just a little before that even, he clearly says in the context of this vision what that vision meant. And that vision was a parable for Gentiles. And no, actually,
all right, I'm going to stop it there real quick. This was oh man, I didn't have the video feed up, did I?
No, you did not. It's okay.
Dang. All we needed was the audio. Good grief. I am so sorry, everybody. You just sat there and watched me and Will like just stare at a screen.
I don't want to interrupt.
Okay,
you know,
I'll definitely
so-
bring the video feed up next time. Yep, I saw you. Okay, I see where you messaged me. Okay, so I'm gonna. Yeah, I was making sure that I had the right point on the YouTube video, so I didn't see that message. What stands out to me about that particular portion, this is the projection I referenced earlier, right? There's a little bit of projection going on here, because MJ's primary premise, right, is that God was tempting Peter to eat these unclean animals, and so that's premise one. Premise two is that God doesn't tempt people to do things that are sinful, right? So conclusion, these unclean animals are not sinful to eat, right? That's the problem is with premise one, right? It doesn't say that God is tempting Peter. Okay. That's something that he's actually projecting onto Peter. He is projecting that Peter would be tempted by the prospect of eating unclean meat, which personally I think illustrates a level of ignorance on probably the view of unclean meat by religious Jews of that period. That's something that would have been considered gross and wasn't even considered food to them. So I think it's quite a stretch to presume that Peter was in any way tempted by this prospect. I think more than likely he was probably shocked by it. The other aspect to this is, right, he read Acts 10:28 and agreed that Peter clearly says that this is about people. So any way that you can insist that it's about food at this point, just personally, I don't know where you derive the argument from that, besides just insisting, well, it's food in the allegory, right? It's food in the vision, so it must also pertain to food. And I think that misses a lot of cultural context here, because to insist that he made a reference to, right, killing and eating Gentiles, and that's clearly not what's going on. So it must be about food, right, and not about the people, because we've, it's like he's saying that because I decided the premise was that it's about food, so it can't be about people, because he's not talking about eating people, right? In rabbinic literature, it is quite common for Gentile nations to be anthropomorphized as an animal, right? To be described in the terms of an animal. Seamus and I actually go into a little bit more detail on this, and we actually mention specific animals that different nations are referred to as, because of certain symbolisms that are applicable there. But this is something that anybody who has read through any of Daniel should be familiar with, right? Because we see numerous nations that are described in animal form throughout Daniel. So this is not uncommon even in the Bible. So I don't think you can make a solid argument that, well, this is clearly about food because he says kill and eat, and it can't be about Gentiles on that basis, when we have a clear-cut basis of Jews using animals to refer to Gentile nations. And then Peter says that God revealed to him in a vision that he is no respecter of persons.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. When MJ brings up the whole temptation thing, as we were joking about earlier, I'm a Milwaukee guy. You're not going to tempt me with DeWalt tools. All right, you're not gonna catch me on that. It's disgusting. It's gross. I don't even touch it or look at it. I've no use for it. Right. So how is this tempting in any way, shape, or form? Exactly, Brad, you're right. I mean, this is disgusting to them. Just because it has a heartbeat and move, right? That doesn't mean that a pig is on the same level as a cow.
Right.
It's not culturally. That is disgusting to them. They don't even touch those animals just because how gross they are. So to say he was tempting him, like, you know, sure, if there was a verse in Acts that said, "Oh boy, God, thank you so much. I've been wanting to eat these my entire life, but I tried to observe your Torah and I restrained myself because it just looks so good." You might have an argument there, but it literally says he was perplexed and wondered what the vision meant.
Right.
And exactly like you said, the animals with Daniel, we have the lion, the bear, the leopard to represent those kingdoms. Even now,
All unclean animals.
yeah. Even now, though, you know, the U.S. represents an eagle, China, the dragon, you know, Great Britain, a lion. So it's not just only in the Bible. We see this now, even today, where countries, people, representations are through animals, just given, you know. And then towards the end, the verse that Trevor had MJ read, he says, "Now I know what the vision means. I should not call Gentiles unclean."
Right.
It's that. It's as simple as that. But yes, exactly, though. You'll still get people who will say, well, no, you know, God also meant he also meant food, though, because God said so. It's like, it's a vision, though. No one actually, going back to Daniel, no one believes there's a 4-headed leopard with 4 wings coming out of the ocean running around. Like that doesn't happen. Everything has symbolism. It's a representation. Gentiles were unclean, so were those animals. Now the Gentiles are not unclean, where we are called to be with them. Jew and Gentile together. It's that simple. But yeah, you still get people who fight against that, and oh no, it's about food. No, I'm sorry. It's quite clear.
Right. And you know, I'm very glad that like it went to this point. Acts 10 is kind of one of the more common passages that will get brought up in this discussion. I thought Trevor did really well here, particularly in these kind of debates. You may get a lot of, so what you're saying is, or so basically you're saying, or, you know, trying to force words into your mouth more or less. And honestly, the best thing to do in that scenario is to repeat your previous statement or repeat your previous premise. Even if you have to reword it a little bit differently, but just you repeat it in your own words, right? This is what I'm saying, right? Because generally so what you're saying is an attempt to try and trap you into the implications of a specific word set, right? A specific phrasing that they think is going to work in their benefit. Because the way that you phrased it doesn't work in their benefit. So the best thing is to just restate it. And Trevor did amazing here, not just restating it, but constantly referring back to the text itself. There was one point, if we were to go further, we would get to that point where he actually read the entire account word for word from the text of Scripture. And you know, it was time consuming, but well worth it, because it's like, okay, look, this is the context of what we're dealing with. Now, after being presented with the totality of it, everybody stops immediately after the vision, right? Nobody reads to the rest of the chapter where he goes and he visits Cornelius, and now he says, God has revealed to me through a vision. Okay, well, what vision? What vision is he talking about? Where was this message revealed to him if it wasn't the initial vision, right? And when you are forced to examine the totality of the passage and reconcile that, it's very hard to argue around that. And I do think MJ had a very difficult time trying to argue around the direct implications of the words of the text itself. So Trevor did very well in that. I'm just not sure how it can be rationalized or insisted upon that it has to be about food. Peter especially. There's a few things I like to point out about this whole narrative, right? The number one is that Peter literally told God no. Like, think about that, and think about like the brass pair that you would have to tell God no. And this is what Peter does. Not once, 3 times he says no.
Yeah.
But the 3 times is important also. If we go back to Peter's instruction under Yeshua, there's a few things that we gather about Peter. One of them is that he was actually a little bit thick. He struggled to grasp certain lessons immediately. And one example that stands out is when he, right there, just prior to the ascension, when he and Yeshua are talking, and Yeshua says, "Peter, do you love me?" Right? We have the 3 times there again, right? It took 3 times before Peter got it and went, "Oh, this is what you're asking."
Yeah. Yep.
And then if we think about the totality of Yeshua's ministry and the time that Peter spent there, Yeshua uses food as an allegory all the time. All the time. And he's not actually talking about food. So this is God reaching out to Peter in what should be familiar terms, and again having to do this 3 times before Peter gets it. There's debate about when that light bulb moment happens, but it's certainly not immediately after he has this vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the Acts 10. I think is probably one of my favorite to discuss, because I remember being on the other side and thinking that this was like, the nail in the coffin on kosher law.
Yeah. It is kind of funny though, because it's like, is this the sacrifice? Is this what Yeshua's sacrifice means to you, that we can eat ham sandwiches? Like all seriousness, is this, we can eat whatever we want? Is it something better, right? What's better, eating whatever we want, or like bringing Gentiles, bringing other people on board of the ark to be in covenant with the Messiah? Like honestly, if Messiah asked me to give up meat, I give up meat, right? Like food, we shouldn't care about food. We shouldn't care about like that. That's so silly. It's the Gentiles, it's the goy, bringing them into covenant. That's the most important thing. That's the whole thing. Because you have a Jew, as in Peter, you have the Gentile, the goy of Cornelius, bringing him in. That's the most important. But again, Christians just focused on the, oh, cool, Acts chapter 10, I get to eat whatever I want. No, it's bringing Gentiles in, saving them, throwing them the life preserver to come onto the ark so they can be saved.
Yep. We'll do one more section because first off, I have to redeem myself after not pulling the video feed up the last time. But also because I did ask a question in the chat, and I want to get your thoughts on that question, but also I'd like the opportunity to further clarify the reasons behind the question. So we will pull this up, and I think this is right before you ask the question.
It is. And I wish I can. Oh my goodness. Here, I'm going to ask you a question while I'm still. I know I'm trying to go back and forth. We'll go with this one. This one for MJ. If God's character is all good and God defined good by giving his law, how do you rationalize God acting against his nature by violating his own definition of what is good?
That was a great question.
God didn't violate his character. He knew that we could not fulfill the law. Therefore, he sent his son. I mean, we all 3 of us agree that Jesus is the Messiah. So Jesus had to die for us. Therefore, you are perfect, sinless in the Messiah.
All right. Thoughts on that, Will?
Well, so was this? I can't remember. Was that kind of pertaining to the the temptation that he was bringing up. How if God is good, why would he be tempting with the law?
That's kind of what inspired it, but it actually was just pertinent to the entire premise from which MJ was arguing, right? Because if well, I asked it in the question, but like, if we have a basis from which to derive that Torah is what God defines as good, right? Then any argument against the Torah and arguing that God is the one who supplanted it would be arguing that God is acting counter to his own definition of what is good, right? So it's an overarching question that applies to any of them, but certainly it was inspired by his statement regarding James. So personally, his answer to me amounts to fire insurance. Because you really don't have, based on his answer, you don't have an impetus to not sin now, right? Because the answer that he gave was, well, God knew that we absolutely can't, right? That we can't do the totality of the law, aka we can't not sin, right? So he sent his son to do that for us. So that perfection and that righteousness is what is imputed to you, so you don't have to worry about being obedient. Okay, so now I can do whatever I want then, right? That's the logical conclusion of that argument. It's fire insurance. I got my ticket punched, right? So I can do what I want now.
It's your license to do whatever you want. Yeah. It's I don't even know how to respond to that, Brad. I'm sorry. It's because you can do whatever you want. Then you're exactly right. And I feel like this is always the argument with the Torah observers and a lot of the Christians is then I get to do whatever I want. Well, no, you still have to follow laws, right? And they'll quote Paul, but it's still quoting the Torah at the end of the day. So then it goes back to, well, then what laws? How do we define laws? Is it the moral, food laws, whatever? Well, none of that's there. As MJS said, it's the entire Torah. So even kind of going back to what I said in the very beginning, if you consider this your holy book, you're going to follow every law as best as you can to the best of your ability. That's it. It's either you follow the whole law or you just pick and choose. And if we're picking and choosing, we're not taking our Father's instructions. We're doing whatever we want to do, what we think is suitable. And the last time someone thought what they were doing was suitable, Adam and Eve, everything got screwed up.
Right. I think one argument generally that I hear against the claim of fire insurance, right, license to sin, is that, well, no, because, if you're not doing the right things, then it's not that you become unsaved. It's just evidence that you never were saved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're behaving in an unregenerate way. And so what I love about that position is it still makes salvation contingent on your works. It's just whether or not it's like prescriptive or reactive, right? The idea of works-based salvation as Christians generally present it is prescriptive, right? In other words, you're not saved if you don't do these things. Whereas Christians actually still believe in a works-based salvation. It's just a reactive rather than a prescriptive works-based. In other words, they believe you aren't saved if you don't do these things, right? In other words, your lack of doing these things is evidence of a lack of salvation, right?
Right.
Because they believe that doing good deeds, right, being obedient should be a reaction to being regenerated. In which case it's like, okay, so then you're agreeing with our position then that doing what is right, doing what is righteous, what God has called righteous, doing the works of Torah should be the reaction to receiving salvation, because that's exactly what our position is. Right? It's not that you have to do this to be saved. It's that if you are saved, you will do these things.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I tell Christians like all the time, because they'll, as soon as I enter a room or any kind of discussion, it's, I have to introduce myself. I'm Will. I am a Torah observer. Oh, so you rely on your own works. Well, Isaiah says that you have filthy rags, but apparently you don't think so. And you think what you can do. No. And I say, I don't follow the law for salvation. I follow the law because of salvation.
Yes.
The law was given to the Israelites after they got out, right? It was faith and then the law was given, right? It was the acceptance and then the law was given. And even in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 22 to 24 talks about how when you come into this, you are a renewed person. You are brand new. So if we are a new person, I'm not going to be doing things that I once did. Like if I'm a raging alcoholic and I am violent towards my family members or anything like that, when I come to Yeshua, I have to make some choices now, because if I'm going to be following him, truly following him, if I truly love him, I'm going to be doing things differently to show the love, to show how I have changed.
Yes.
And without that, it's, if I say I love my wife and put my hands on her, do I? No, I don't. If I can't have that self-control, I truly don't love her at the end of the day.
Right. The last thing, and we really don't even need specific video clips on this because it was scattered throughout the entire debate. I would encourage everybody definitely to go to Will Walkey's channel and go watch this debate, because it really was a good debate to watch. But one thing that kept getting repeated, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, was the accusation of supersessionism, right? That Torah observers are supersessionists. Now, let me first state there are some schools of thought in Torah observance that are legitimately supersessionists, but I mean by the actual definition of the word. What Trevor outlined and what I think you and I both agree on is not supersessionism. It's inclusionism, which is not the same thing. but yeah, tell us what you think about that accusation.
I was shocked. I'm like, replacement theology? Like, you're I'm a moderator. I'm keeping silent, but I'm just like shocked that you are going to say this. There's going to be some small pools of Torah observance.
There's the fringe.
But Torah observers believe that they are grafted into Israel, and then there is the Jews, and just as like the two rods coming together. Zechariah chapter 8 verse 23, we're out of the nations, go to the Jew and say, come, we know that God is with you, let's go worship on Mount Zion. Like, we are grafted into Israel, so Judah's our big brother per se. Right. When I heard that, I couldn't do it because I'm trying to remain neutral. I really wanted Trevor to say, Will, please bring up the exact definition of replacement theology. Right. I wanted him to do it. Thinking back, maybe I probably could have. So like, hey guys, do you want me to bring it up? But I really tried to stay out of it. Unless someone asked me to do something, pull up a Bible verse or, whatever. Because just as you did with the video, I can pull up a quick little split screen and, ask Rabbi Google what something is, or if there's a specific dictionary that they want me to pull from, I could do that. So I try to stay out of it. I probably could have and should have pulled up the exact definition of replacement theology. I was shocked. I was shocked because people who really hold to that are Christians. They're like, the Jews that they've abandoned Jesus long ago, so now we're God's chosen people, the church.
Right. I one of the other things I think that I find fascinating about that, because I understand part of MJ's position theologically would include what is called unconditional eternal security. In other words, once saved, always saved, which makes this idea of fire insurance like it's like an even harder argument to try and make, which is why they rely on the whole, well, if you're not acting regenerated, then you weren't saved in the first place, right? Because unconditional eternal security means that I can do whatever I want and I'm still saved, but that would require a fundamental change in God himself, right? Because if now that he's chosen Christians and Christians can't become unsaved, we have to rationalize how God chose Israel, and now it's not Israel. So unconditional eternal security actually is a legitimately supersessionist position. But I just struggled to understand how, like, we're not saying that God replaced the Jewish people as his people. We're saying that God is including Gentiles who yoke themselves to Israel, in particular, like Gentiles who desire to serve the God of Israel and live among that community, as a people, that those Gentiles are grafted into that community. Where's the replacement there? There's no replacement there.
Yeah, and I mean, he's still making videos talking about it and still, accusing of replacement theology. It's like one of those things where it's like, MJ's not a dummy. He has a master's degree. If it was a random dude on TikTok with, I don't know, maybe if someone was like no theological degree and he was like some dumb plumber somewhere saying these crazy things, you can maybe cut him some slack. But like, definitions are important. If we're going to accuse someone of something, we shouldn't have a pretty good idea what the definition that we are accusing them of, along with the where are they getting this from, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, anything else you want to say about how the debate went? Other than that, I think we're at a good point to kind of close out.
So there is one thing. I don't know if Trevor or MJ will watch this or whatever. I do want to say both did good, though. I definitely let the reins go. I kind of wanted everything to be said. No holdbacks. I would suggest if I can critique, excuse me, if I could, I think if Trevor worked on his questions better, it looked a little scattered. He'd be a little more direct with questions. And with MJ, work on your intro. It did seem like it was little not prepared. It was like almost bullet pointed, and he kind of did off the cuff. And he kind of went off in little directions. He wasn't like straight to the point. Other than that, though, I have a lot of respect and love towards MJ and Trevor. I thought they did good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think, and again, it stayed relatively respectful. You naturally in any debate, you're going to get an amount of ad hominem on both sides,
Right.
That it's just part of the performance, but I do think that they both maintained a relative level of respect that I think was made it worth watching. Right, the last thing I really want to watch, as much as I love a firestorm, I don't want to watch two people just sit there and sling mud at each other. Right. So there's like a happy medium of like where to keep it, and I think that they were able to kind of find that sweet spot and maintain that. I think I can agree on the question portions with Trevor, but I think I see a part of where he was going, and I do think which you and me have discussed, that the question portion is kind of you learn more about your opponent's position rather than trying to find a gotcha spot, and I think maybe that's the direction he was going in. It's, you and I both know, man, it's hard to think that way on the spot. We're watching from the outside, you know, and in hindsight here. But I definitely think I appreciate the cool mellowness that Trevor was able to maintain. I actually in some ways envy that. He's got a much cooler head than I tend to have.
Right.
And I think MJ did very well at least in my opinion. I think he did well at phrasing some of his questions in a way that would have worked for his benefit if he got the answer that he wanted, right? So that he asked the right questions, right? And I mean that's important because even if you have a good point to make, right? If you have a valid point to make, if you're not able to ask the right question to elicit that response, then it's not going to go anywhere. So I think MJ did a really good job at that. But I think Trevor also did a good job of avoiding that.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I disagree with MJ. But I mean, he asked good questions, you know. He did. I thought it was good. It definitely wasn't like a one-sided debate, you know. He definitely asked some good questions to him.
Absolutely. So that's I guess where we'll close it out. Hang out a little bit backstage because there's one thing I want to run by you backstage. But yeah, we'll close out here and definitely thank you and appreciate you making the time to be here tonight. I've been wanting to do a review of this, and I may do another a more in-depth long-term review that goes in multiple parts where we just go over the concise, like a whole debate's worth. That'll be 4 or 5 parts because it is a 3-hour debate.
It's long but good. If people who are serious about, you know, looking at it, you know, should Christians observe it or not? That's why I wanted people to really come in here with an open mind. You know, sure, if you're, you know, we're gonna get biased people, but just come in, be quiet, just listen, hear what the other person has to say.
Absolutely. So again, Will, thank you. Definitely hope to have you back on the channel again sometime, either as a co-host or you know, to debate again. Maybe one of these days I'll debate on your channel.
Maybe.
But other than that, everyone else, thank you for being here to watch. And, you know, let us know in the comments what you think. Definitely go and watch that debate. It really was a good debate to watch. I think anybody who hasn't seen it, you'll definitely get something out of it one way or another, no matter which side of the aisle you fall on. That being said, I hope that this video has been helpful for those who at least did watch the debate. I understand it can be confusing if you didn't watch the debate to kind of know where we were going, but hope it's been helpful. Hope it's been enlightening. Will, my man, L'chaim.
L'chaim.